The locker room is supposed to be sacred. What happens inside those walls, the arguments, the frustrations, the raw unfiltered emotions after a brutal loss, is supposed to stay there. Players have an unspoken agreement. You fight on the field. You bleed together. And when those doors close behind you, whatever is said inside that room stays inside that room. But sometimes, something so significant happens that it cannot be contained. Sometimes, the walls talk. And what came out of the Dodgers locker room after that Giants loss was the kind of story that does not just make headlines, it reshapes how we understand an entire team. Because when Freddie Freeman, one of the most respected voices in that clubhouse, a man who has earned every ounce of that respect, directed criticism at Shohei Ohtani, something fundamental shifted. This was not a frustrated comment from a rookie who didn't know better. This was not a misquoted throwaway line from the bench. This was Freddie Freeman. A World Series champion. A first baseman who has played the game at the highest level for over a decade. A teammate. A leader. And the Dodgers organization responded with a decision that stunned the entire league. Shohei Ohtani, the most watched, most celebrated, most valuable player on the roster, was benched for 3 games. Let that sit for a moment. The man who rewrote the rules of baseball. The man who signed the largest contract in sports history. The man who carried this franchise to a championship, sitting in the dugout, watching, while his team played without him. How did it come to this? What exactly did Freeman say? And what does this moment reveal about the hidden tensions inside the most star-studded roster in modern baseball history? Let's go inside the room. To understand what exploded in that locker room, you first need to understand what happened on the field. Giants vs. Dodgers. A rivalry that never needs extra drama, but got plenty of it anyway. From the first inning, the Dodgers looked off. The sharpness that defines their best baseball was missing. Pitches that should have been strikes ran out of the zone. At-bats that should have been productive ended in silence. And defensively, there were moments, just moments, but noticeable ones, where the communication between players looked fractured. The Giants, to their credit, played a complete game. They executed. They capitalized on every opening the Dodgers gave them. And when the final out was recorded, the scoreboard told a story that the Dodgers organization had not been prepared to read. The walk back to the locker room is always revealing. Watch players closely in those moments, in the tunnel, during the first few minutes after a tough loss, and you will learn more about a team's culture than any media availability could ever tell you. Some players put their heads down and process privately. Some talk loudly to fill the silence. Some look for someone or something to blame. And in the Dodgers locker room that night, the atmosphere was not the controlled, professional disappointment of a team that simply got outplayed. It was something sharper. Something personal. Sources close to the situation described a tension that had been building for several games, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Small things that accumulate. Miscommunications. Moments on the field where expectations and execution did not align. And a creeping sense among some veterans in the clubhouse that certain standards that this franchise had built its recent success on, were being inconsistently applied. Freddie Freeman had been quiet about it. Until that night, he wasn't quiet anymore. Freddie Freeman does not say things carelessly. That is one of the first things anyone who has covered this team will tell you. He is measured. He is thoughtful. He understands the weight that his words carry inside that clubhouse, and he uses that weight deliberately. So when Freeman spoke up after the Giants' loss, it was not an emotional outburst. It was a statement. The specifics of what was said inside that locker room have been reported through multiple sources, each adding a different layer of detail. But the core of Freeman's message was this: in critical moments during that game, decision-making at the plate did not reflect the preparation and the approach that this team demands of itself. There were at-bats, important at-bats, game-defining at-bats, where the execution fell short of the standard. And Freeman, as one of the vocal leaders of this roster, felt that needed to be said out loud. He directed that message, at least in part, toward Ohtani. Now, context is everything here. Freeman was not attacking Ohtani as a person. He was not questioning his commitment or his talent or his value to this franchise. Anyone who interprets this moment as a personal assault on Ohtani's character is missing the point entirely. What Freeman was doing was holding a teammate accountable. At the highest level. In the way that great teams hold each other accountable. But accountability, even when it comes from the right place, can land differently depending on how it is delivered and how it is received. Ohtani, by every account, heard what Freeman said. He did not respond publicly. He did not fire back. But those who were in that room described a silence from Ohtani that was louder than any reply could have been. A silence that communicated something important, that he had heard it, that he did not fully agree with it, and that he was processing it in the way that Shohei Ohtani processes everything, internally, privately, and with a seriousness that most people will never fully understand. The room felt it. Coaches felt it. And by the next morning, the front office knew exactly what had happened. What the Dodgers organization did next was something that almost nobody predicted. They benched Shohei Ohtani for 3 games. The official explanation from the organization was careful and measured, language about managing workload, about giving certain players rest during a stretch of the schedule, about long-term planning for the postseason push. All of it technically plausible. All of it covering something much more significant. Because nobody in baseball believes that Shohei Ohtani was rested for 3 games because of workload management. This was a message. A deliberate, calculated organizational message delivered in the loudest possible way, by removing the face of the franchise from the lineup and forcing everyone inside that clubhouse to sit with the discomfort of what had happened. Think about what that decision required. The Dodgers front office had to weigh the competitive cost of playing 3 games without their best offensive weapon against the cultural cost of letting the locker room situation simmer unaddressed. They chose culture. They chose accountability. They chose the long game over the short one. That is not a decision made lightly. That is a decision made by an organization that understands something most franchises do not. A locker room that loses trust in its own standards will eventually lose more than games. It will lose itself. The 3-game benching sent a signal to every player on that roster. It said, nobody is above this. Not the MVP. Not the $700 million man. Not the greatest two-way player in the history of the sport. If the standard slips, there are consequences. Full stop. Freeman, to his credit, did not celebrate this decision publicly. He did not use it as validation. In fact, those close to the situation suggest he felt the weight of it, because he understood better than most what Ohtani's absence would cost the team on the field. His criticism had never been about wanting Ohtani sidelined. It had been about wanting Ohtani to be the player the team needed him to be. There is a significant difference between those two things. But in the heat of a locker room crisis, that difference can be difficult to maintain. Cameras do not lie. During those 3 games in which the Dodgers struggled without their anchor in the lineup, in which every at-bat felt like a reminder of the absence in the middle of the order, Ohtani sat in that dugout and watched. And the way he watched told the whole story. He was not sulking. He was not performing visible resentment for the cameras. He sat with the same quiet intensity that he brings to every single thing he does. He tracked pitches. He studied at-bats. He spoke to teammates when they returned to the dugout after their innings. He did not check out. But there was something in his eyes during those 3 games that was different from the Ohtani we normally see on that bench. A sharpness. A focus that went beyond the usual preparation. The look of a man who was taking something that had been said to him, something difficult, something that had cut through that famous composure, and turning it into fuel. Those who have followed Ohtani's career closely recognize this pattern. He has done it before. When something challenges him, when someone questions something about his game or his approach, he does not argue. He does not deflect. He goes quiet. He goes deep into his process. And then he comes out the other side performing at a level that answers every question without speaking a single word. The 3-game benching was not, in the end, a punishment for Ohtani. It was an opportunity. An uncomfortable, publicly visible, organizationally imposed opportunity, but an opportunity nonetheless. An opportunity to reflect. To reset. To decide, in the privacy of his own preparation, what kind of player and teammate he wanted to be from that moment forward. If Freddie Freeman's message had been heard, truly heard, this was the moment it would show. The Dodgers are a team that has been built for October. Every decision made in that organization, from roster construction to in-season management to the uncomfortable conversations that happen behind closed doors, is made with the postseason in mind. Regular season games matter. But what truly matters is whether this team, when the stakes are at their absolute highest, is capable of playing as one unit. Locker room chaos, left unresolved, has destroyed teams that looked unstoppable on paper. History is full of rosters loaded with talent that collapsed under the weight of internal fracture. Chemistry is not a soft word. It is not a term for people who do not understand advanced statistics. It is a real, measurable force, and when it breaks down, the results appear in the box score. The Dodgers know this. Freeman knows this. And Ohtani, who experienced the opposite of this during the WBC, who understands what it looks like when a team is truly unified around a shared standard, knows this better than anyone. The question now is whether this moment becomes a fracture or a foundation. The most resilient teams in baseball history have shared one thing in common. They were not teams that never had conflict. They were teams that knew how to move through conflict. Teams where the difficult conversation in the locker room made the relationship stronger rather than weaker. Teams where one veteran looking another player in the eye and saying this is not good enough led not to resentment, but to elevation. That is the choice sitting in front of this Dodgers roster right now. Freeman has made his position clear. The organization has made its position clear. And Ohtani, sitting in that dugout, tracking every pitch, filing away everything he has seen and heard, is in the process of making his position clear in the only language he has ever truly spoken. Performance. When he returns to that lineup, the entire baseball world will be watching. Not just to see whether he hits. Not just to see the numbers. They will be watching to see something harder to quantify, whether the look in his eyes has changed. Whether the focus is different. Whether what happened in that locker room, and in those 3 games of watching from the bench, produced something that could not have been produced any other way. Here is the truth about what happened inside the Dodgers locker room. A great player had a difficult game. A respected leader said something that needed to be said. An organization made a painful decision because it valued its standards more than its comfort. And the most talented player on the roster sat in a dugout for 3 games and had to confront something that fame and money and historic contracts cannot protect you from. The mirror. Every great player eventually faces a moment where someone they respect tells them that good enough is not good enough. That the standard demands more. That the team needs more. How they respond to that moment defines them, not the home runs, not the strikeouts, not the contract. The response. Freddie Freeman has been in this game long enough to know that the message he delivered in that locker room was not a comfortable one. He delivered it anyway, because that is what genuine leadership looks like. Not the leadership of the press conference. The leadership of the hard conversation. The leadership that costs you something. And Shohei Ohtani has been in this game long enough to know that the player who comes out of difficult moments stronger is always, always, the player worth believing in. The locker room door is closed again. Whatever was said inside those walls is being processed, internally and collectively, by a team that is still figuring out exactly who it wants to be. But one thing is certain, when Ohtani steps back into that lineup, he will not be the same player who walked out of it. He never is.